Today we're talking about how to spot weak evidence being used in discussions, helping you notice when someone's facts don't support their arguments. These are 7 red flags I learned through my medical training at Cambridge and are simple concepts I use every day. In just a few minutes, you'll gain these same tools that I use to tell how strong a piece of scientific evidence is. Let's put this in context with a story from during the pandemic about people, mistakes, and one controversial phrase.
Following the science.
As the situation evolved and public anxiety grew, British politicians said this again and again, trying to assure everyone there was a plan. But now we have a COVID inquiry, we're learning the truth, that this was an empty slogan, that senior people in government didn't know what the scientific evidence was trying to tell them, in a world where those skills have never been more important, that the fact there were some people saying the UK's health service could be overwhelmed while others were saying COVID was just like the flu. That meant the scientifically clueless were destined to be caught up in the ensuing confusion. We should have asked, but how do you follow the science? And that's where this video comes in. So if you're feeling curious, if you want the confidence to tell between trustworthy science and misleading claims, or if you want to know what science is saying for yourself, let's get into it. Lack of peer review. Andrew Wakefield was once a reputable doctor, but he became completely infamous for his study linking the MMR vaccine with autism. Despite this being published in a reputable journal, the paper turned out to be a sham and had to be retracted. But the interesting question is, why had it been believed in the first place? One answer lies in the peer review system, where experts in the field correct the paper if its methodology is not robust. This is supposed to act like a fail-safe device, identifying sloppy science before it gets published. Just like the brakes on your car not working, inadequate peer review had dire ramifications, fueling vaccine hesitancy and resulting in outbreaks of preventable diseases. So if you're not verifying the peer review status of a paper you're reading, you shouldn't take it as gospel. So how do you tell? For safe bets, I usually stick to well-known databases like PubMed, Web of Science, and JSTOR, which are havens for peer-reviewed journals. Secondly, watch out for authors who cite themselves a lot. That can be a red flag and tell you that the information isn't corroborated by independent sources. Third, beware predatory journals, which can masquerade as peer-reviewed under false pretenses. These are some initial background checks, but the next tips will help you dive into the meat of the content. And if you're enjoying the video so far, like and subscribe to support this content. Number 2, dodgy study design. Just like a house needs solid foundations, scientific research hinges on having the right study design. Imagine you want to find the best coffee in my hometown of Edinburgh. You turn to 2 friends for advice. Friend A suggests collating Google Maps reviews. Don't worry, Google's not sponsoring me. This would be a type of observational study called cross-sectional. On the other hand, friend B proposes a blind taste test. This could be done as a randomized double-blind control trial, the gold standard of experimental studies. There are lots of other study types like ecological studies and case series. I'll put a list in the description, but for simplicity, if you're actively testing and measuring, it's experimental. But if you're observing natural occurrences, it's observational. Now here's where it gets intriguing. Each study design has its limitations. Observational studies, while they're easier to do, can't prove causation. Variables like the decor in the cafe or the price might affect people's perceptions of the coffee, and with them, your results. On the other hand, experimental studies, though very robust, might not always apply in the real world. Lab conditions don't translate well to you sipping your coffee in a cozy cafe armchair. And this isn't just hot beverages we're talking about. Medical scientists often end up scratching their heads if truths from animal research turn out not to apply in humans. Now, let's turn to another twist in the coffee study design story. We must also consider if they measured the right thing. What if friend A wanted to measure sales instead of review ratings? Or friend B wanted an expert panel of coffee tasters instead. These are proxy outcomes, and they're a key thing to look for because they can ruin a study if they don't match what everyday coffee lovers actually think. Now here's a question. Could these quirks make you pick the wrong cafe? Well, it's a judgment call. The further a study deviates from directly measuring the real variable of interest, the shakier its findings become, just as if you drunk too much coffee. So to spot this flaw, read the outline of the study design. Are they measuring the right things in the right way to test the claim they're making? Now this isn't just an academic exercise, it's crucial if you're going to differentiate fact from fiction and avoid sipping any misinformation. Gonna choke on my tea here. 3. Control groups. Now, in any discussion, there is no bigger red flag than someone claiming proof of causation with a non-controlled study. Without a control group, you're left in the dark, unable to distinguish the actual cause from various other factors. Picture this scenario. You come across a study touting a remarkable 20% increase in profits because of a new marketing method. It's certainly an attention-grabbing headline, but then you find out that there's no control group. That 20% figure could be due to a host of other variables. It could even be the placebo effect from being involved in the study. Now, with that story, let's put it into practice through something you'll have heard of, A/B testing. That's where you create your own control group. Now, provided you select the groups randomly, it helps you test. YouTubers use it for thumbnails, journalists for headlines, and so on. Now here's what's important. Not having a control group is one of the most common ways we can deceive ourselves through unreliable data. But now that you've seen this, hopefully you won't make such a rookie error. 4. Sample size. Sample size is what tells you your findings are real instead of just lucky. Take the 2000s TV programme The System, where the famous mentalist Derren Brown told a woman the right horses to bet on 5 times in a row, a 100% win rate with a sample size of 1. But, and this is a spoiler, that's not really what's going on. In fact, Derren Brown had recruited a much larger sample size, 6 to the power of 5 or 7,776 people, giving them each different bets to make. Win rate 0.01%. Sample size almost 8,000. If the sample size had remained at 1, we would have completely the wrong idea about whether the system actually worked. Now you might ask, what about N=1 trials, which are being talked up in alternative circles? While these trials definitely have a place in personalised medicine and rare diseases, their luck ends there. They just can't replace the statistical power of larger studies, leaving them worse at finding truths that generalise to the whole population. So before you believe a study which bigs up a diet or supplement, first, you should look for whether 10 people were tested or 100,000 were. Second, you can also look for meta-analyses and systematic reviews. These pool data from multiple studies, which helps filter out these random variations. That way, you can see which findings are true and which are just lucky flukes. And lastly, you have to be aware that even large studies don't tell us whether the effect it's measuring is large enough to be meaningful. It just tells you whether the effect is really there or not. 5. Cherry picking and bias. In my opinion, cherry picking isn't just dodgy science, it's a betrayal of trust. Imagine you want to find out what the most efficient method of exercising is in your local area, and you decide to ask a scientist friend. They tell you they'll design a survey about what exercise people are doing and whether they meet their goals with it. Sounds good, right? But then you find out he's handing out the surveys outside the local gym, rendering the findings worthless. Worthless because he's cherry picking his participants, he's standing outside the gym, and he's introduced bias into the data. And while that's a non-medical example, pharma are often guilty of this too. Medicine has always tended to test drugs on fit young men, who are really quite different from your grandma, who's actually more likely to be taking the drug. This kind of selective reporting happens everywhere, from climate change reports that focus only on short-term gains, to educational policies that are built on the studies of elite schools only. Do you assess your evidence in this way? Because if not, how can you be sure that you're making the right decisions? I really care about this. Science is supposed to be our best attempt at uncovering the truth. If someone is cherry picking, they are only showing us what they want us to see, like a magician using misdirection. And if you care about this too and you've enjoyed the video, then really consider subscribing to the channel. Conflicts of interest. Now, Let's say you're part of a jury for a murder trial, and the defence's main witness also happens to be the prime suspect's best mate. Would you trust that testimony without a second thought? Well, conflicts of interest in scientific research are no different. While they often appear as little disclaimers at the bottom of a page, you should treat them as massive red flags. Research, unfortunately, depends on funding, and simply put, donors want to see a return on their investment. Here's an example of this at its worst, when tobacco companies were funding research to say it wasn't clear if smoking caused cancer. Actually, there was no doubt that it did. So you should question if a study's findings are obviously beneficial to its funder. For example, a tech company saying that screen time isn't harmful to kids. Now you might ask, isn't that the scientist's job to avoid conflicts? Well, sure, but it's also our job as responsible citizens to take these studies with a pinch of salt before we believe them. Otherwise, there's no incentive for them to stop doing it. 7. Overstating results. This is my favourite story in this video. In the 1990s, the media seized on a brand new phenomenon, the Mozart effect. They dramatised the idea that Mozart's music could increase children's intelligence and academic performance. Before long, parents were playing Mozart to their child, even in the womb, and schools incorporated classical music into the lessons. Everyone thought that they were following the science, but the actual study, titled Music and Spatial Task Performance, had only reported a temporary improvement in spatial temporal reasoning among college students. They definitely didn't report permanent intelligence boosts in everybody that listened to Mozart. Subsequent research found that other types of music and even simple mental exercises produced similar results. Now, how had this happened? The original study's findings had been exaggerated and misinterpreted by the media, impacting on public perception and actually changing behaviour. If you're like me, you tend not to believe sales pitches like lose weight without dieting, but exaggerations that seep into science can lead anyone astray. This is a common problem. According to a study published in PLOS ONE, 34% of academic articles overstated their findings. Worse yet, 48% of media articles exaggerated even more than the studies themselves. If the newspapers had said, Mozart temporarily boosts spatial abilities, no one would have read the story, and research funding might have suffered. It's not hard to figure out how that could influence people, politicians, and even governments. So how do you put this into practice? Remain skeptical. You need to ask, does the headline match the content? Remember, science that is good clickbait isn't necessarily good science. If you've ever wondered how to sound as compelling as Barack Obama, click here to learn what rhetorical devices he uses. And clicking here instead will teach you 7 new ways to respond if someone tries to dismantle your point of view. Like and subscribe to support this content, and I'll see you in the next video.